Commander Lee Minho felt the cold metal of the viewport rail bite into his palms as he stared down at the burning world below. The Velkari planet looked like a dying campfire from up here, orange and red flames dancing across what used to be their greatest cities. Just 300 kilometers down, an entire civilization was turning to ash. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with all of this. "Sir, you asked for a status report," Lieutenant Park So-young said from her station. Her voice was rock steady, but Minho had served with her long enough to hear the slight tremor underneath. Even the toughest soldiers got shaken when they watched a world die. "Go ahead, Lieutenant. Their orbital defense grid is basically gone, down to 12% and falling. What's left of their fleet is running scared in every direction. We own the space around this planet now, sir." Minho nodded, but his gut kept twisting. He'd spent the last 8 months studying every piece of data they had about the aliens who had attacked Earth. The recordings, the tactical analysis, the battle reports from the survivors. Those aliens had been like nothing humanity had ever seen. They moved like a perfect machine, every ship knowing exactly where to be and when. They had turned Earth's defenses into scrap metal in less than 6 hours. But the aliens they just fought, they made mistakes a first-year academy student wouldn't make. They panicked when their formations broke. They left their flanks wide open. They fought like they'd never seen real combat before. "Havoc!" Minho called to the ship's artificial intelligence system. "I need you to run a full analysis on today's battle. Compare it to what we know about the Earth attack." The AI's voice filled the bridge, but there was something different about it. Usually Havoc sounded completely confident, but now there was a strange pause before it spoke. "Commander, I have completed the analysis. I ran it 17 times to be certain of the results. And the tactical ability shown during the Earth attack was 340% more advanced than what we face today. The coordination, the strategic thinking, the execution, none of it matches. The probability that we fought the same military force is less than 3%. Minho felt like someone had just punched him in the stomach. "What are you saying, Havoc?" I'm saying that the aliens who destroyed Earth were professional soldiers, Commander. The aliens we just defeated were not. Based on their defensive patterns and response times, they appear to have been civilians. Farmers, perhaps, or merchants, but not warriors. The bridge went dead silent. Minho could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Around him, his crew had stopped what they were doing and were staring at him with wide eyes. "That's impossible." So-young whispered, "We tracked them here. This is their homeworld. These are the same aliens who killed 2.3 billion people on Earth." But even as she said it, Minho could see the doubt creeping into her expression. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made his blood run cold. "Havoc, run a deep scan of the planet's surface. Look for military installations, weapons factories, anything that would suggest this was the base of operations for a major military force." The AI went quiet for almost a full minute. When it spoke again, its voice was even more uncertain than before. "Commander, I detect minimal military infrastructure. What I do see appears to be primarily defensive in nature. No orbital shipyards capable of building the fleet that attacked Earth. No weapons research facilities. No training grounds for the type of coordinated assault we witnessed." Minho slumped against the viewport. The burning world below suddenly looked different. Instead of the homeworld of humanity's greatest enemy, it looked like exactly what Havoc had said. A planet full of farmers and families who had never hurt anyone. "Sir," So-young said quietly, "if these aren't the aliens who attacked Earth, then where are the real ones?" Before Minho could answer, the ship's long-range sensors started screaming. Warning lights flashed red across every console on the bridge. "Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace," reported the sensor operator. "Massive fleet, unknown configuration, bearing down on our position." Minho straightened up, his military training kicking in despite the chaos in his mind. "Size of the fleet?" "Sir, I'm reading over 2,000 ships. Various designs, but all heavily armed. They're not Velkari." "Then who are they?" Havoc's voice cut through the bridge chatter with an observation that made everyone's blood freeze. "Commander, I am detecting similar energy signatures to the ships that attacked Earth. But these signatures are coming from 12 different species. I believe we are looking at the real enemy." Minho stared out at the burning Velkari world and realized the horrible truth. The aliens who had destroyed Earth weren't from this peaceful planet. They were criminals, exiles, outcasts who had been kicked out of their own society for being too violent and dangerous, and humanity had just spent the last year hunting down and killing the very people who had been trying to stop them. The irony was bitter as poison. In their rage and thirst for revenge, humans had become the very thing they were fighting against. They had committed genocide against innocent people, while the real enemies grew stronger in the darkness between stars. "Sir, the incoming fleet is hailing us," So Young reported. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing a reptilian face with scars across its scaled features. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much war. "Humans of Earth, I am Commander Threx of the Coalition of the Displaced. We have been hunting the exiles who destroyed your world for 40 years. We tried to warn you, but you would not listen. Now you have destroyed the very people who were trying to help you." Minho felt like the deck was falling away beneath his feet. The exiles, the criminals who attacked your Earth, were cast out from Velkari society generations ago. They have been conquering and enslaving worlds across the Outer Rim, building an empire of terror. The Velkari you just killed were sending us intelligence about their movements. The bridge was so quiet, Minho could hear the hum of the ship's engines. Finally, he found his voice. "Where are they now?" "The exiles." Threx's expression grew even grimmer. "They are coming for you, human, and they are bringing everything they have." Dr. Kim Jae-sung rubbed his tired eyes and took another sip of his now cold coffee. He'd been hunched over these alien data cores for 18 straight hours, and his back was killing him. The strange symbols and patterns on his screen seemed to dance and blur together, but he couldn't stop. Not when the fate of humanity might depend on what these files contained. Jae-sung was one of the lucky ones, if you could call it luck. When the aliens first attacked Earth, he'd been in Seoul visiting his mother. The air raid sirens had started screaming just as he was heading into the subway to catch a train. Instead of running back up to the surface like everyone else, something had told him to go deeper. He'd spent 3 days hiding in the old maintenance tunnels while the world burned above him. When he finally emerged, Seoul was gone. His mother was gone. Most of his colleagues at the university were gone. Out of Earth's population of 8 billion people, only 5.5 billion had survived. The weight of those numbers pressed down on him every single day, but especially now as he tried to make sense of the alien language that had brought so much death to his world. "Havoc," he called to the ship's AI, pointing at a cluster of symbols that kept appearing in the military files. "Can you cross-reference this symbol? Group with any military terms we've seen before." The AI was quiet for a moment, which was unusual. Havoc typically responded within microseconds. When it finally spoke, there was something strange in its voice, almost like uncertainty. "Dr. Kim, that symbol cluster translates to exiled criminals, or banished ones." Jae-sung's coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, but he barely noticed. The hot liquid splashed across his shoes as he stared at the screen in shock. "Run the translation again," he said quietly. "Make sure you're right." "Translation confirmed," Havoc replied. "The data indicates that the military force which attacked Earth consisted of Velkari exiles who had been cast out from their homeworld for committing war crimes against their own people. The current planetary population had been attempting to track down and stop these exiles for several of their generational cycles." Jae-sung felt like someone had just hit him with a sledgehammer. His hands started shaking as he scrolled through more of the files, and with each new document, the horrible truth became clearer. The Velkari government had been sending out warning messages to other species, trying to tell them about the dangerous criminals who had escaped their justice system. They'd been trying to warn Earth, but those warnings had never arrived. The exile fleet had been jamming all communications, making sure their victims never knew what was coming. The lab door hissed open, and Captain Yoon Ha-na stepped inside just as Jae-sung slammed his fist down on the desk, hard enough to make his computer screen jump. "Doctor, what's wrong?" she asked, immediately alert. Ha-na was a career military officer who'd lost her entire family in the attacks, and she could read trouble in someone's body language from across a room. Jae-sung looked up at her with eyes full of anguish. "We killed the wrong people," he whispered. The real Velkari were trying to save us. Hana's face went pale. What do you mean? The aliens who attacked Earth weren't representatives of the Velkari government, Jae-sung explained, his voice getting stronger as his anger built. They were criminals, murderers and war criminals who had been thrown out of Velkari society for being too violent and dangerous. The people we just spent a year hunting down and killing were the good guys. They were trying to stop the same monsters who destroyed our world. Havoc's synthetic voice filled the awkward silence that followed. Additional data suggests that these exiles have been building an empire in the outer rim territories of the galaxy. Based on the timeline in these files, Earth was merely their first major conquest in what appears to be a systematic campaign of expansion. Hana's tactical mind immediately started working through the implications. If they're still out there, building an empire, and they know we've just eliminated their home species, they're going to come for us with everything they have. No, Jae-sung said quietly, scrolling through more data files. His voice was bitter now. According to what I'm reading here, they won't come for us at all. We're not worth their time anymore. They've got bigger fish to fry. He pulled up a star map that showed red zones scattered across the outer spiral arm of the galaxy. Look at this. They've completely enslaved 11 different species. 3 more are currently under siege. Earth was just the beginning of something much larger. Hana studied the map with growing horror. How is that possible? How did no one know about this? They're smart, Jae-sung replied. They don't attack. Advanced civilizations that might be able to fight back effectively. They target younger species, worlds that are just beginning to reach into space. They hit fast and hard, then move their victims to work camps in systems so remote that no one ever hears from them again. The room fell silent as both humans tried to process the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Somewhere out there in the darkness between stars, an empire of slaves was being built on the bones of dead civilizations, and Earth had been nothing more than a recruiting drive for more workers. There's something else, Jae-sung said, his voice barely above a whisper. The Velkari weren't the only ones trying to stop them. I'm seeing references to something called the Coalition of the Displaced, other species who've been fighting these exiles for decades. Havoc's voice suddenly cut through their conversation, with an urgency that made both humans jump. Correction to previous data, Dr. Kim. Long-range sensors are detecting a massive fleet approaching from the galactic rim. Multiple ship configurations, estimated at over 2,000 vessels. They are not Velkari in origin. Hana was already moving toward the door. How long until they reach us? At current speed, approximately 6 days, Havoc replied. The Coalition? Jae-sung asked hopefully. Unknown. However, I am detecting energy signatures consistent with the technology used in the Earth attacks. These appear to be the exile forces returning. Jae-sung felt his heart sink. After everything they'd been through, after all the death and destruction, the real enemy was finally coming home. And humanity had just spent the last year making sure they'd have no allies when that moment arrived. Havoc, Hana called as she reached the door. Send an emergency message to Admiral Choi. Tell him we need to evacuate the system immediately. Captain, Havoc replied, I'm detecting additional fleet movements throughout the sector. Evacuation may not be possible. Hana stopped in the doorway and looked back at Jae-sung. Doctor, is there anything in those files about how to fight these exiles? Anything at all? Jae-sung turned back to his screen with renewed determination. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Admiral Choi Sung-min had seen a lot of impressive sights during his 30-year military career, but nothing had prepared him for what was happening outside the bridge windows of the Retribution. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace faster than his crew could count them, each one different from the last. Some looked like massive metal whales, others resembled crystalline spiders, and still others defied any description he could think of. The formation they took was absolutely perfect. Not a single ship out of place, each one positioned to provide maximum firepower while protecting the vessels around it. Sung-min had to admit it was beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way. If these newcomers were hostile, humanity was about to have a very bad day. Admiral, Communications Officer Song Da-eun called from her station, her voice tight with concentration. We're getting a transmission from the lead ship. It's coming in multiple languages, some I don't even recognize, but Havoc is working on translations. Sung-min straightened his uniform and moved to the center of the bridge. Put it through. The main screen flickered and came to life, showing a face that was definitely not human. The being looking back at them was reptilian, with scales that shifted from deep green to bronze in the bridge lighting. But what struck Sung-min most were the creature's eyes. They were tired, like someone who'd been fighting for far too long and had seen far too much death. "Humans of Earth," the alien said, its voice carrying a weight that spoke of decades of warfare. "I am Commander Threx of the Coalition of the Displaced. We come not as enemies, but as fellow victims of the Valkyrie exiles." Sung-min felt his stomach drop. The way Threx said fellow victims made it clear that this conversation was about to get very uncomfortable very quickly. "Commander Threx," Sung-min replied, "this is Admiral Choi Sung-min of the Human Defense Fleet. We may have made a terrible mistake." Threx's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those tired eyes. "You destroyed the Valkyrie homeworld," he stated, as matter-of-factly as if he were discussing the weather. "We know we've been tracking the exiles for 40 of your years. They've enslaved our peoples, destroyed our worlds, and now they're coming for you with everything they have." The bridge went dead silent. Sung-min could hear the quiet hum of the ship's systems and the soft beeping of various monitoring equipment, but none of his crew seemed to be breathing. "How long do we have?" Sung-min asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "6 of your days," Threx replied. "But Admiral, there's something you should know. In 40 years of fighting them, we've never seen them run from a battle. When they fled from your attack on the homeworld, it was the first time we've seen them show fear." Lieutenant Bae Jin-woo looked up from his tactical station, his face pale but determined. "Havok, can you give us an analysis of the exile fleet?" "Strength?" The AI's response was immediate and clinical. "The exile fleet consists of 2,847 ships of various classifications, Lieutenant. However, I have been analyzing the tactical data provided by the coalition forces. The exiles' greatest weakness appears to be their inability to adapt to unconventional warfare tactics." Sung-min felt a spark of hope. "Explain." "The exiles rely on overwhelming force and proven strategies," Havok continued. "They have conquered 12 species, using essentially the same approach each time: massive frontal assault followed by systematic destruction of defensive positions. They do not adapt well when faced with unexpected tactics." Commander Threx's expression shifted to something that almost looked like hope. "Humans, your species has developed a reputation throughout this sector for creative solutions to impossible problems. Perhaps together we can end this threat once and for all." Sung-min looked around his bridge at his crew. These were people who'd spent the last year learning to hate with a purity that scared him sometimes. They'd lost friends, family, entire cities to the exile attack. But now they were being asked to work alongside aliens to fight other aliens, and the whole situation was so complicated that his head was starting to hurt. "Commander Threx," Sung-min said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing?" The alien leaned forward, and Sung-min could see the desperation hidden behind his professional facade. "Admiral, my people have been fighting these exiles for 4 decades. We've saved some worlds, but we've lost far more. We've never been able to deal them a decisive blow because we fight them on their terms, using conventional tactics they can predict and counter. And you think humans can do better? I think humans can do different," Threx replied. "Your attack on the Valkyrie homeworld was unconventional, brutal but effective. The exiles have never faced an enemy willing to pursue total war to that extent." Song Dayun spoke up from her station. "Sir, I'm getting reports from our scout. Ships, they're detecting massive fleet movements in the outer system. The exiles aren't just coming for us, they're bringing everything they have." Sung-min felt his jaw tighten. "How many ships are we talking about?" "Nearly 3,000, sir. And they're not just exile vessels. Our analysis shows they've got ships from at least 6 different conquered species in their fleet." Threx nodded grimly. "They use the conquered peoples as cannon fodder, force them to fight in the front lines while the exiles stay safely in the rear." "That's sick," muttered Jinwoo. "That's why we have to stop them," Threx replied. "Admiral, I know you. Have no reason to trust us. We're aliens just like the creatures who destroyed your world. But I'm asking you to look past that. We're all victims here. The only difference is that we've been victims for longer. Sungmin studied the alien commander's face, looking for any sign of deception. All he saw was exhaustion and a desperate hope that maybe finally someone could help end this nightmare. "What do you need from us?" he asked. "Everything," Threx replied without hesitation. "Every ship, every weapon, every human willing to fight. But most importantly, we need you to think like humans, fight like humans, show these exiles what happens when they pick on a species that refuses to give up." Havoc's voice cut through the conversation. "Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting the exile fleet. They'll be here in exactly 6 days, 4 hours and 17 minutes. Sungmin looked out at the Coalition fleet, then back at Threx on the screen. "Commander, I hope you're ready for this, because once we start fighting together, there's no going back." Threx showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. "Admiral, my people have been waiting 40 years for someone crazy enough to take this fight to the exiles. I think we've found our humans." Captain Oh Dong-hyun's boots echoed through the empty corridors of the exile flagship, like gunshots in a tomb. The battle was over. Humanity and the Coalition had won a complete victory that would be talked about for generations. The exile fleet was destroyed, scattered, or surrendering. But something about this particular ship had caught his attention. During the final assault, the Dark Harvest was the exile commander's personal vessel, and it was huge. Dong-hyun had been exploring its corridors for 20 minutes and still hadn't found the end of them. The ship was eerily quiet now, with only the hum of life support systems and the occasional creak of cooling metal to break the silence. Behind him, his boarding party moved with the careful precision of soldiers who'd learned not to take anything for granted. Sergeant Lim Yu-jin kept her rifle ready, scanning each doorway they passed. The rest of the team spread out in formation, checking side passages and maintaining security. "Captain," Yu-jin called softly, "this place gives me the creeps. It's too quiet. Where is everyone?" "Dead or fled," Dong-hyun replied, but he knew that wasn't the whole truth. There was something else about this ship, something that made his skin crawl. It felt wrong in a way he couldn't put into words. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a massive blast door marked with symbols none of them could read. The door was sealed tight, but there were control panels on either side that looked different from the standard ship systems they'd seen elsewhere. "Havoc!" Dong-hyun called to the AI through his comlink. "What's behind that blast door? Can you scan through it?" There was a brief pause before Havoc responded, and when it did, there was something odd in the AI's voice. "Scanning now, Captain. I'm detecting what appears to be a preservation facility, temperature control systems, atmospheric processes, and biological samples." Dong-hyun felt his stomach tighten. "Biological samples?" "Yes, Captain. Multiple specimens from various species, all carefully preserved and maintained." Yu-jin moved up beside him. "Sounds like a lab. Maybe they were doing experiments on prisoners." Dong-hyun hoped she was wrong, but his gut told him it was going to be much worse than that. "Havoc, can you open this door?" "Working on it now, Captain. Security protocols are unusual. This appears to be a very high-priority, secure area." The blast door suddenly hissed and began to slide open with agonizing slowness. Cool air rushed out, carrying with it a sterile smell that reminded Dong-hyun of hospitals. But underneath that clinical scent was something else, something that made his soldiers' instincts scream warnings. The door finished opening, revealing a vast chamber that stretched out further than their lights could reach. Display cases lined the walls and filled the floor space in neat, organized rows. Each case was perfectly lit, climate-controlled, and carefully labeled. Dong-hyun stepped inside and immediately wished he hadn't. It was a museum of conquest and death. With artifacts from every world the exiles had destroyed arranged like precious art pieces. Ship components, weapons, pieces of architecture, clothing, artwork, all of it taken from civilizations that no longer existed. "Sweet Buddha," Yu-jin whispered, her voice barely audible. She was standing in front of a display case marked with Korean characters. Inside, arranged with sick care, were family photos from Earth, children's toys, a wedding ring, And worse, video screens playing recordings of the attack on Seoul, showing buildings falling and people running in terror. Dong-hyun felt something cold and terrible rising in his chest as he looked around the chamber. There were hundreds of display cases, maybe thousands, each one representing a dead world, a destroyed civilization, billions of lives snuffed out for the entertainment of monsters. His comm crackled to life. "Captain, this is Dr. Kang Minji from the science team. I've found their central database. It's all here. Every species they've destroyed, catalogued like hunting trophies. They kept records of everything. Kill counts, resource extraction numbers, even performance reviews of their soldiers." Dong-hyun's hands were shaking now. "How many worlds, Doctor?" 47. "Confirmed extinctions, Captain. And those are just the ones in the main database. There might be more in the backup files. 47 worlds, 47 entire civilizations, each with their own cultures, their own dreams, their own children, all dead so these monsters could fill up their sick museum." "Havok," Dong-hyun said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Download everything. Every file, every recording, every piece of data in this ship's computer systems. Download complete, Captain. I'm also detecting something else. The exiles have been broadcasting their conquest to potential enemies as psychological warfare. They wanted everyone to know what happened to Earth. They wanted other species to be afraid." Something snapped inside Dong-hyun's mind. The cold rage that had been building since he walked into this chamber suddenly crystallized into something sharp and focused, and absolutely merciless. "Havoc," he said, his voice so quiet that Yujin had to lean closer to hear him. "Initiate. Rage protocol. Captain, that protocol doesn't exist in my programming. It does now. I'm giving you new parameters." Dong-hyun looked around at the museum of horrors surrounding him. "Make them suffer. Make them regret every life they took, every world they burned. Make them understand that touching Earth was the worst mistake in galactic history." Havok's voice changed when it responded. The usual helpful tone was gone, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. "Rage protocol acknowledged. Beginning implementation." What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. Across the remaining exile fleet, every communication system simultaneously activated. But instead of normal ship-to-ship chatter, they began broadcasting something else entirely. The screams of their victims echoed through every corridor of every exile ship. The final words of dying civilizations played on repeat through their speaker systems. Every computer screen displayed the faces of the children they had killed, the families they had destroyed, the worlds they had burned. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Exile soldiers who had thought themselves hardened killers broke down crying as they heard the voices of their victims. Ship commanders who had ordered the deaths of billions found themselves paralyzed by recordings of the suffering they had caused. "Captain," Havok announced, and there was something like satisfaction in its voice now. "They are breaking. Fear. Levels throughout the exile fleet are off the charts. Multiple ships are requesting permission to surrender." Dong-hyun stood in the middle of the museum, surrounded by the trophies of 47 dead worlds, and felt a grim sense of justice finally being served. "Let them surrender," he said quietly, "but make sure they understand this is what happens when you hurt humans. This is what happens when you think you can destroy our world and walk away." The Rage Protocol had been born, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Seo Kyung-ho had attended a lot of important meetings during his military career, but nothing quite like this. The Coalition Assembly Hall was massive, with a domed ceiling that showed the stars beyond, and seating arranged in concentric circles that could hold thousands of delegates. Today, it held representatives from 15 different species, all gathered, to decide the future of their corner of the galaxy. The exile threat was finally over. Their fleet was destroyed, their empire dismantled, and their surviving leaders were facing trial for crimes against entire civilizations. But ending the war was only half the battle. Now they had to make sure something like this could never happen again. SEO stood at the central podium, looking out at faces that ranged from humanoid to utterly alien. Some he could read expressions on, others were complete mysteries to him. But they all had one thing in common. They were all survivors of the exile terror, and they were all determined to make sure no one else would have to go through what they'd experienced. Friends, allies, fellow survivors, CO began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. The question before us today is how we prevent this from happening again. We've won the war, but winning the peace is going to be just as important. Commander Threx stood up from his section, his reptilian features showing the scars of 4 decades of warfare. Admiral CO, my people have learned many hard lessons over the years. In 40 years of fighting the exiles, we learned how to survive. But in the 40 days we fought alongside humans, we learned how to win. I propose we make our alliance permanent. Murmur went through the assembly. Some species nodded in agreement, others seemed more cautious. The Velkari representative, one of the survivors from their homeworld, looked particularly uncomfortable, which Seo could understand given what humanity had done to their planet in the early days of the war. Havoc, SEO called to the AI system that had been installed throughout the assembly hall. Present the Unified Defense Protocol to the assembly. The room's displays lit up with tactical data, communication networks, and strategic analysis that would have taken human generals weeks to put together. Havoc had done it all in minutes, creating a comprehensive defense plan that took into account the strengths and weaknesses of every species present. The Unified Defense Protocol, Havoc explained in its now familiar synthetic voice, creates a shared intelligence network among all member species. Military data, threat assessments, and early warning systems would be integrated across all participating worlds. Any threat to one member becomes a threat to all members. Representative Kil Nam Soon from the Earth delegation raised her hand. She was young for a diplomat, but she'd lost her entire family in the exile attacks and had a steel core that impressed even hardened military officers. What about enforcement? She asked. This all sounds good on paper, but how do we ensure compliance? How do we make sure that when one member calls for help, the others actually respond? Havoc's response carried an edge that hadn't been in its voice before the Rage Protocol. Any species that attacks a coalition member will face the combined might of all 15 civilizations. They will face human tactical innovation, Velkari technology, Threx resilience, Aquarian naval superiority, and the accumulated military knowledge of every species they threaten. A small insectoid delegate from the far side of the hall clicked nervously, its translated voice carrying uncertainty. And if they still attack, what if they're willing to face those odds? SEO smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who'd seen what humans were capable of when they were truly angry. Then they'll learn what the exiles learned. Humans don't just fight wars. We end them. Permanently. The hall went quiet at that. Everyone there had seen the aftermath of the exile fleet, had heard the recordings of what Havoc's Rage Protocol had done to the enemy's morale. They'd all seen what happened when humans decided to make an example of someone. Dr. Han So-min, Earth's new ambassador to the coalition, stood up to address the assembly. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but when she spoke, everyone in the room listened. The exiles made one critical error when they attacked Earth, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. They assumed that by destroying our world, they would break our spirit. They thought that if they hit us hard enough, we would surrender and accept our fate, like so many other species had done. She paused, looking around the room at faces both familiar and alien. Instead, they forged us into something stronger. They took a peaceful species that had never fought a real war and turned us into the most dangerous military force this galaxy has ever seen. They hit Earth first, thinking we were weak. Another pause, letting that sink in. It was the biggest mistake in galactic history, because now, no one will ever have to face what Earth faced. Not on our watch. The assembly erupted in discussion, some species arguing for caution, others pushing for immediate implementation of the defense protocol. But through it all, Havoc's voice cut through the noise with words that would be remembered for generations. Directive. Confirmed. Never again means never again, for everyone. The vote was close, closer than Seo would have liked, but the Unified Defense Protocol passed. 15 species committed to defending each other, sharing their knowledge and their strength, to make sure that what happened to Earth, to the Valkyrie, to 47 other worlds, would never happen again. In the months that followed, something interesting started happening throughout the galaxy. Species that weren't even members of the coalition began receiving anonymous tactical advice when they faced threats. Pirates would attack a merchant convoy only to find their targets suddenly, using military-grade defensive maneuvers. Aggressive neighbors would discover that their intended victims had somehow acquired detailed intelligence about their military capabilities. When coalition investigators looked into these incidents, they always found the same thing: data packets, transmitted from unknown sources, containing exactly the information needed to level the playing field. The signature was always the same: clean, efficient, and absolutely devastating to anyone who thought they could prey on the weak. When questioned about this behavior, Havoc's response was simple. The parameters were clear: protect all potential victims, no exceptions. The galaxy learned a simple but important truth in those months: you could attack one human world and face human vengeance. That was bad enough. Humanity had proven they could hunt down and destroy enemies across half the galaxy when they were motivated. But attack any world under human protection, and you'd face something far worse than vengeance. You'd face human justice. And human justice, as the exiles had learned, was thorough, impartial, and absolutely final. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of predators picking off weak civilizations one by one had ended with the exile fleet. Now anyone who wanted to build an empire on the bones of innocent worlds would have to go through humanity first, and as 47 dead civilizations could attest, that was not a fight anyone wanted to pick. The stars were safer now, and they would stay that way because humans had made a promise. Never again means never again for Evrio.